Welcome to The Explainer. I am so thrilled to have you with us today because we're about to go on a pretty intense sensory journey right back in time. We're going to strip away all our cozy modern comforts and step straight into the harsh, freezing, and frankly, brutal realities of the 17th century. We're taking a really close look at a fascinating historical narrative that reconstructs the world of a real boy living in the Massachusetts Bay Colony. We're basically piecing together what it truly meant to come of age in a time when survival was absolutely never guaranteed.
I want you to think back to when you were 15 years old. What were your biggest worries? Maybe it was passing a tricky math test, getting your driver's permit, or just figuring out who you were going to sit with at lunch. Now, compare that to our subject today, Shubael Seaver. For Shubael, at just 15 years old, childhood is already practically over. The expectations placed on him would honestly crush most adults today. So what was life really like when simply surviving the winter required the absolute discipline of a grown man? Let's find out.
Section 1. Adulthood at age 15. To really grasp this reality, we have to step right into the bitter cold of a February morning. And I'm not talking about a brisk chill in the air. We are talking about a bone-deep, punishing freeze. Just imagine the scene for a second. It's Roxbury, Massachusetts Bay Colony, 1655. The wooden walls of the workshop are thick with rim frost. Every single breath Shubael takes billows out in a huge white cloud right in front of him. His hands are already completely numb, wrapped in nothing but a thin pair of wool gloves his mother knitted for him, but his father deliberately placed him in this environment. Why? Because he believed that physical discomfort keeps the mind sharp and the spirit humble. There are no space heaters here, folks, just raw, pure endurance. The stakes of living in this raw, unforgiving frontier town were astronomically high. Roxbury had only been settled for maybe 30 years at this point. It was a tiny, tight-knit community of roughly 200 people, and it was completely surrounded by this vast, looming wilderness. Survival here meant you had to step into adulthood immediately. Strict community and religious laws governed literally every waking moment. And even at 15, Shubael watched the men conduct these quarterly militia drills with muskets and pikes, knowing full well that the safety of the entire colony rested squarely on their shoulders.
Section 2. The Wheelwright's Brutal Lessons. Okay, so breathe in the sharp smell of fresh-cut wood and heavy oil. You can almost feel the crushing pressure of a 7-year apprenticeship. Shubael is learning from a master craftsman in his 60s, a guy whose hands have shaped wood for 40 years. Master Wheelwright imparts this incredibly practical, hard-earned wisdom that you just cannot find in any book. He teaches Shubael that survival and success mean having a deeply tactile knowledge of nature. Like he teaches him that a tree grown on a sunny south slope is actually weak. If you want strong, tight-grained spoke wood, you've got to hike 5 miles out to find slow-growth oak clinging to poor soil on north-facing hills.
But these lessons, they weren't just about picking the right trees. They were about extreme, unforgiving precision and accountability. Just a week earlier, Shubael learned a harsh lesson. He'd misaligned the mortises on a wooden hub, which basically meant the spokes wouldn't fit. The wood was totally ruined, unsalvageable. And instead of just fixing it for him, Master Wheelwright forced Shubael to rebuild the entire hub from scratch, telling him coldly that waste teaches better than plenty. No safety nets whatsoever.
Because crafting a simple cartwheel actually required some highly technical, geometric 17th century engineering. Shubael literally had to use dividers to calculate 14 mortises at exactly 25.7-degree intervals. Then he had to cut them to the perfect depth, attach the wooden rim, and finally perfectly shrink a hot iron tire incredibly tightly over the wood using water. It's a massive undertaking, because if he failed, the cart failed. If the cart failed, the farmer couldn't work. The pressure resting on a 15-year-old's shoulders was just immense.
Section 3. Strict Faith and Hickory Sticks. Now, the physical world was incredibly demanding, but the intellectual and religious world of 1655, it was absolutely unyielding. What's super interesting here is the stark contrast in the discipline Shubael faced in his two educational environments. Under Master Wheelwright, learning by doing, mistakes were met with a physical strap across the back of the legs, but usually only by the third offense. In grammar school, though, under Master Prentice, Shubael literally bore a permanent callus on the palm of his hand from being struck with a hickory stick, simply for having messy handwriting. Discipline was physical, it was immediate, and it was entirely expected.
And what exactly was he learning in that grammar school? Well, 107.
That is the staggering number of questions and answers from the Westminster Shorter Catechism that a 15-year-old boy was expected to have memorized flawlessly. There was absolutely no room for hesitation, no room for error. So the really crucial point here is that this rigid framework governed literally every single thought and action in the colony. And it was tested relentlessly at home by his father. Shubael had to stand at rigid attention and mechanically recite that man's chief end is to glorify God and to enjoy him forever. This wasn't just some Sunday school lesson, right? This was the foundational law of their entire reality.
And that brings us to the grueling endurance test that was the Puritan weekend. Come Saturday evening, all work immediately ground to a halt for bathing and strict mental preparation. Sunday morning meant sitting perfectly, and I mean unmovingly still, on freezing hard wooden benches during a 2-hour-long sermon. And maintaining that complete stillness wasn't just out of some vague sense of respect, it was enforced by the very genuine, looming fear of the father's strap for any boy caught squirming.
Section 4. Family Duty and Imminent Loss. After a brutally long day at that freezing workshop, Shubael heads home into the dark winter evening. He opens the door to the comforting warmth of the hearth, but there's this profound, suffocating grief hanging over the household. 7 children live here, but the dark shadow covering all of them is the mother, Elizabeth. She is bedridden with incurable consumption. The family is also still grieving 3-year-old Hannah, who passed away just the year before. The emotional toll on the patriarch, Robert, and his eldest son, Shubael, is just staggering to think about. I want you to try and imagine the immense emotional weight of this heartbreaking conversation. Shubael is sitting by his mother's bed. Her hands are as light and fragile as a bird's. She looks at her 15-year-old boy and delivers these dying words, essentially cementing his rapid transition into manhood. She's facing her death with this intense Puritan stoicism, and she is directly asking him to carry on the family's strength. But despite all of this heavy adult reality, Shubael is, well, he's still just a teenager. He does find these fleeting, rare moments of youthful joy and danger. He carves crude wooden foxes by the fire with his brothers. He goes reckless winter ice sliding on planks of wood, and actually once crashed spectacularly right into a tree. He goes summer river swimming, nearly drowns, and gets soundly beaten by his father for putting himself in danger. And in his quietest moments, alone in the shop, he plays secular tunes on a secret reed pipe. It's this tiny, tiny act of rebellion in a strictly religious world.
But those moments of youth, they were incredibly brief. By the firelight, his worried father pulls out these complex property documents. He shows Shubael boundaries, measured in acres, rods, and perches that the boy is going to have to protect very soon. His father is passing the torch of adulthood, ensuring his eldest son understands that while his trade will feed him, land is the true measure of a man's independence in the colony.
So it's late afternoon. The winter darkness is falling fast, and Shubael is alone in the darkening shop. He wipes down his workbench, his hands heavily calloused and stained with wood dust. He softly hums a psalm tune, maybe a little more joyfully than he'd ever dare in front of his father. And he's just perfectly caught there in the crucible, right between his fading childhood and a life of heavy, unyielding adult duty. It really makes you step back and just marvel at the silent resilience of the past. At just 15 years old, dealing with freezing labor, severe physical discipline, rigid religious laws, and the imminent loss of his own mother, Shubael had to step up and be a man. So I'll leave you with this to reflect on. If you were dropped into Roxbury in 1655, how would you have carried the immense weight of the 17th century? Thank you so much for exploring this remarkable piece of history with me today, and keep questioning the world around you.